So welcome back. Thanks for joining me as I go through my painting process. This is the way I start. I mix up a very diluted mixture of burnt sienna. So you can see here I've put in my my reference sketch to the left of the screen. I did this drawing on site, and I wanted to show you this before I put the reference photo up on screen, because in some ways this sketch gives off more of an idea of my goals throughout this painting. And even though I will be relying quite heavily on the reference photo, it's this sketch that has some clues as to what I want the painting to turn out like. So I'm using this faint burnt sienna wash just to plot out some key points in space. Nothing too heavy. I see many watercolor artists start their paintings with a pencil, and I really don't quite understand why you'd want to do that with a watercolor painting. I just find that if you do that, the lead of the pencil, when you go to do your really light washes to begin with, the lead of the pencil just dirties those really bright colours. So yeah, instead I prefer to use this wash because it doesn't, once it's dry, it doesn't bleed into the washes that go over it. So I'm just continuing here to do a few measurements, just trying to get the proportions correct at this stage. I'm interested where certain lines, where they meet others, how they interact with the edges of the painting. Probably start to think at this stage about where the washes are going to go. Just feeling out the different areas of the painting. One of the key challenges of this painting will be retaining the light tones, such as the highlights on the brickwork, and you'll see in a minute as I put up the reference photo. So now you can see the actual photo itself, the colours and the lighting. So as I mentioned before, I'll be relying pretty heavily on this reference photo, but at the same time, I just want to be aware that, I'm creating a painting. I don't want to replicate a photograph. So just always in the back of my mind, thinking more abstract about the painting itself. So here's the first washes. I'm beginning with a pure wash of cadmium yellow medium. This will be the lightest wash on the painting, but I didn't want it to be white. I didn't want it to be the white of the paper, which I sometimes do leave the white, but in this case I wanted it to have like a warm sort of light. I think it goes better with this sort of overcast conditions that I'm trying to capture. So I've added a touch of cadmium red and a little bit of ultramarine blue to the mix, just to put in the sand areas of the beach. It's getting slightly darker. And then this wash here of the concrete pavement is a wash of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And these tones really set the lighter areas up. It's always confusing at this stage because you're thinking that they're too dark. It's very easy to think that they're too dark. But that's mainly because the rest of the white paper is showing. So I would consider that the way that I do watercolour is a very methodical way of doing it. I usually move through the tones in order from lightest to darkest, with some exceptions, but generally I find that it's good to move through logically like that. So now the tones are getting just slightly darker. They definitely wouldn't be considered dark yet, but they're in that range of light to medium. Just differentiating between the very light and the mid-tones. So even though these are more detailed areas, I generally don't want to get too detailed, but because I've got that wash ready to go, I will sometimes do these details early. So you saw there, just using a swatch to match the colours. So we're blocking in some of the foliage now. Yeah, foliage is a very big part of my artwork. I don't know if there's many paintings I've ever done which don't have some greenery in them. And I try to categorize the greens. Here you see I've divided some of the greenery up into different tones. In Australia, what I find is that a lot of our native foliage is quite olive green in appearance. It's almost verging on a brownish red green. So I do add a lot of red to my green mixtures. it's always a tricky balance between the local color of something and just the abstract paint color that you're using. Going back to the photographic reference thing, um, one of the key things is not getting too caught up in local color. So I've mixed up here. This is a fairly dark tone now. I'm moving more into the mid to dark tones of the painting. And even though this does appear quite dark, it will dry a little bit lighter. And also the building was in shadow. So that whole side of the building is actually behind where the light source is from the sky. Yeah, this was one of the things that really inspired me looking at this scene, was this beautiful rusty red brick colour. It's a nice change. A lot of the scenes that I paint are quite cool. They've got a lot of blues and a lot of greys. So when I saw this scene, it was a really good one so that I could get a bit of red, mix up a bit of red for a change. You can start to see, even with the first wash, that some of the main areas are starting to form. And I'm always conscious that when I notice that I probably won't want to touch that area too much as the painting goes on. One of the key things I think with watercolor, with art in general, but with watercolor in particular, is that once something's working, it's a good idea just to not touch it, just to leave it. It's a very hard discipline to learn, but it's definitely worth it because it is a medium that is easily overdone. And myself, as a painter who uses quite heavy pigmentation on my watercolors, I'm always aware of trying to keep a certain lightness in the work. As watercolor artists, and I'd be keen to hear what you guys think, but as watercolor artists, we often don't get the same second chances that an oil painter might get. Second, third, fourth, fifth chances. Sort of a one-way street with watercolors. So looking back on this, as I put the darker, there's sort of almost black tones in now. I do wonder whether some of this was a little bit too dark. If I had to sort of critique my own work, which I often do. So yeah, just describing the little headland in the distance here. So this wash here is a darker version of that red mix. I think I put a little bit of alizarin crimson in to the mixture just to give it a bit more of a deeper shade. And you'll see in a minute that I'll use that same darker red tone just to describe some of the darker areas of the brick, otherwise it looks a little bit flat. So as I get closer to finishing this painting, as one of my great art teachers once said, the stakes get higher. And what he meant by that was that the decisions that you make in this part of the process have a greater impact in some ways than the ones earlier on. So I'm quite considered and quite careful about where I choose to put these darker colours. Because these darker colours are going to both create the light, but they can also deaden the light and diminish it. So it's quite a crucial time when you're finishing a watercolour. Well, I find that anyway. If you guys out there share the same feelings or you have different ideas, I'd be keen to hear about them. So now I'm going through and just defining some of this foliage. If you've watched one of my other videos, you'd see that I do a similar process where I'll put the lightest tone of a tree or a shrub down first, and then I'll come back over it just to lay down a shadow tone on top of it. I always try to use translucent pigments to do that so that the underlying colour shows through. So in this case, I think I was using Prussian blue, cadmium yellow light, which isn't actually translucent, but yeah, that the Prussian blue is a very transparent pigment and alizarin crimson are both transparent. So we're really at the darkest end of things now. This colour's an almost black colour. I don't actually use a lot of black pigment. I tend to mix up a black using blue, red, and a touch of yellow. Okay, so at this stage, I've taken a bit of a pause to have a look at the painting and review it. This is a stage where the painting's nearing completion, but it still needs some tweaks in various areas just to really to hone in on the initial image that I'm trying to capture. Obviously all of the white space is gone now. I've blocked in most areas, and as I mentioned before, some of these areas will stay as just a single wash, single stain, and others I'll overlay a watercolour wash to start adjusting to really bring out different gradations of tone and stuff. It's also a good time maybe to just show you the little sketch that I made on site down on the beach, and I've only just brought it out now. Up until now, I've sort of been using the photograph as a reference, but it's a good time now to then go back to this sketch and really try and remember what it was that drew me to this scene, and some of the differences in tone, and might just trigger some memory of the actual place rather than just going off that photograph. So yeah, it's a good time to have a look at that. And yeah, like I said, it's almost done. We've got our darkest darks in, but I don't want to go too much darker on all the other colours. Probably my main decision is whether I'll add anything to this light area and this. I've got a bit of a wash here that you'll see planned, and a little bit more shadow in the foliage, and then I will mix up a darker shade wash for the red brick areas, just to bring out some of just to bring out some depth to these red brick areas. I think some of them are fine as they are, but others need a little bit of adjusting and coaxing. This is that darker red mixture that I was mentioning. Just yeah, added a little bit of alizarin crimson to that sort of terracotta brick colour, and just using it to just break up some of those areas. Could say less is more at this stage of the painting. So I'm continuing to define some of the foliage here with a slightly darker green. The biggest challenge, I think, is knowing when to be quite heavy-handed with a painting and when you need to have a very light touch, something that I sometimes struggle with. But I think it's important to recognise the two modes. Just really trying to put a few little finishing touches on here. Just some minor details, and then we're almost done with this one. Okay, so I've called this one done for now. I was getting to a point where the decisions I was making would possibly take the painting from being quite fresh and have life to it and have sort of easily readable form and space to possibly getting into the realm of overworked or too dark. So that's always a good time, especially with watercolour, to just stop. Doesn't mean that the painting has to be finished. It just means it's a good time to maybe just pull back, have a good look at it. And what I might do from here is actually take it out of the studio, and I'll usually put it inside the house. My house is right next door, so I'll take it inside and pop it up on the mantelpiece. That's my sort of revolving gallery, but it just means that I can look at this painting for the next week or two and see it from a distance and just see it out of the corner of my eye while I'm, in the kitchen and stuff like that. And that way you can really sort of judge the painting a bit better. At the moment, I've been looking at this painting for so long that it's hard to gauge what you're seeing. So yeah, good time to stop. As you see, I put in a few washes just to differentiate some of the shading, this darker area here, a little bit more shadowing in the foliage, just to give a bit of variation and movement through the painting. And as you can sort of see, I try to create like a visual pathway that leads through the painting, through space, through two-dimensional space, but also through an imaginary three-dimensional plane. You can imagine sort of physically walking down the hill, around, through and under into like a distant plane, which is often what I'm trying to achieve. And I think what many painters are trying to achieve is a sense of depth and space in their work. So I'll call this a day for this painting and move on.